Hello and good afternoon, unless you're on the West Coast, and I think it's still morning. My name is Brian Spiro, and I'm with IntelliChief, and I'm here to first welcome everyone today to the first of our 3 webinars in a series for manufacturers, with today's session to go over and review the competitive advantages for manufacturers in automation of both accounts payable and sales order management. So again, I am with IntelliChief, and I'm going to take us through a webinar today that should last maybe 30 to 45 minutes and set the stage on these 2 subjects. Before we get started, before I even share the agenda with you, I really just wanted to start by showing you some statistics that will make it pretty telling, I guess, as why we're focusing on manufacturing, the manufacturing sector today, and really talking about process automation. I think the numbers that are up on the slide here should jump out to everybody. And the reality is that a lot of manufacturers haven't deployed automation in their back office and line of business functions, probably not to the extent or the degree that automation might have been adopted on the shop floor. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity for you to realize very significant cost savings as well as efficiency savings. And that's really what we're going to zone in on in the session here today. So if we take a look at the agenda, I'm going to start off by giving you a little bit of information, a little background on IntelliChief, specifically our solution, because I think that really sets the stage and serves as a baseline for how we're going to address automating accounts payable and the processing of inbound customer orders. So I'll do that. We'll talk about some process challenges. Then we'll start to unpeel the onion just a little bit in both of those key processes, take a look at some case studies of existing IntelliChief customers, and then we'll wrap it up. And certainly I'll field your questions at the end of the session. So in the GoToWebinar panel, if you can fill out your questions, any that you have at any point in time in the questions panel, I'll review those at the end and answer those. And I will also make note and try to remind you at the end, but there's also in the GoToWebinar pane, there's a handout section. And there's a PDF you can download there, an IntelliChief guide that you can walk away with some additional information. And this session, of course, is being recorded as well. So we can get you the link at the end of the session and you can rewatch it and share it with others on your team. So let's get started. Let's talk about IntelliChief and let's focus in on the IntelliChief solution. The solution that we develop and provide here is considered to be an enterprise content management solution. So if we think about what that means, it's really a platform that you can utilize to manage the life cycle of all your documents and all your content throughout your entire organization. We're going to focus on accounts payable and sales orders or customer service today, but really it's a platform the entire organization can leverage. And where it makes sense and where the requirements dictate, we want to take the technology and integrate it with your ERP application or really any business application that's tied to these business processes. So if we look at some of the high-level features and functions within a content management solution so you can understand where we're taking the subject matter today, I think at its core, at the foundational piece, we're talking about an electronic document storage and retrieval solution, right? So you have all of these documents. They live in a variety of formats, a lot of them as paper, a lot of them are disparately filed. And having a centralized, secure document repository is a core component of a content management solution. And it's not just storing those documents, but it also has to do with managing the various retention policies that you have for those documents, retention policies that could be driven by the industry that you're in, by your corporate guidelines, by government guidelines. So retention management, it's more than just storing documents electronically. When we talk specifically about accounts payable and inbound customer orders, the subject of data capture or the functionality of data capture really starts to become a requirement. And that's where the system is able to extract and capture the information that's on those inbound documents so that it can process that information downstream into your ERP system. Workflow is obviously a big component of this, eliminating the paper shuffle and taking these documents and routing them between people and departments and locations within your organization based on business rules, really to drive automation. And when you're not in the office, being able to leverage your mobile device to access workflow and participate in any sorts of approvals or reviews that need to take place. Visibility, process visibility then becomes important, right? If you're going to leverage workflow, you're going to want to be able to analyze how that process is performing. So when we talk about analytics, we talk about reports, we talk about dashboards, we talk about a 365-degree view of what's going on within that business process. And going hand in hand with that is a history and an audit trail of every action taken on a document. Was it viewed? When was it viewed? When was it approved? Whose queue is it in right now? Does it require some sort of exception handling? So that's all part of the solution. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this introduction on content management, we want to take all these features and functions and where it makes sense, integrate that in with your core ERP system. So if we think about all of those features and functions and capabilities, and now you want to apply them to your organization, we're going to start today talking about accounts payable. Of course, accounts payable can just naturally extend into that broader purchase to pay process, right? So the departments of purchasing, receiving, and accounts payable might all take place in the accounts payable automation solution. But there might be unique requirements that you've got in those other departments that this platform could certainly address for you one-off. We could look at accounts receivable, certainly customer service, order entry, and we're going to spend some time on that today. Whatever department or function within your organization that's responsible for entering in your customer orders into your ERP system, that's where we want to drive automation within that business process. Shipping and accounts receivable, part of that broader order to cash process, of course. Human resources, which we're really not going to talk about today, but that's another very common document-centric process that could leverage the platform. And I know I'm going to touch on some others in a minute, but just to give you kind of that big picture view of some key target areas of where the technology could play within your organization. And, you know, the reality is we've got hundreds of customers here at IntelliChief who are using our solution. And, you know, even within the customer base, within our manufacturing customer base, even though we do have other verticals, of course, using IntelliChief, but even within our manufacturing customers, the customer base is pretty diverse. Everything from food and beverage, pharmaceutical, heavy equipment, automotive, foundries, consumer goods, right? So I think the story there is all of these organizations have had struggles in how they've processed inbound customer orders or payables, and that led them to a solution, and that led them to us. And it's really the experience and the best practices that we've learned from all of these implementations that we could bring to you as you go down your automation journey with us, hopefully. So a lot of experience, and that's really why I bring these organizations up on the screen, is just to demonstrate that to you. So let's talk about some process challenges, specifically in accounts payable and in your sales order process. Again, on the sales order side, you know, you'll probably hear me interchange sales order, customer PO, customer service, order entry, right? Because so many different departments or phrases are used for that one function versus accounts payable, which I think is across the board. But when we talk about challenges, I want to break it down into a few different categories. And I want to start with the fact that these functions are document intensive, both of them, right? So the challenges that come about from a document intensive process, we just start with the fact that your suppliers are going to send you invoices. Your customers are going to send you orders. These documents, they arrive to you a lot of different ways, right? From an invoice standpoint, on the payable side, you get them in via email, hopefully a lot more via email than you do in the mail, but hard copy in the mail is probably a percentage of your volume. You might also get invoices that come in with the shipment. And I am focused on documents here. So I understand that for both of these processes, you might receive invoices and orders via EDI. You might have a portal, vendor portal, customer portal. You might have some other ways of receiving the transactional data. So I'm focused here on the document side. Probably from a customer order standpoint, most of your PO documents come in via email. Maybe you still have a few coming in via fax, but if you're like a lot of organizations that I speak with, my guess would be that email, EDI, and maybe an online portal would be the three most common ways that you're receiving inbound orders. Oftentimes, these documents, invoice, and orders, they can be sent into one or more departmental or general email addresses. So maybe you've defined an email address in accounting, an email address in customer service, and you've instructed your suppliers and your customers to send these documents to those respective email addresses. But maybe they're also or instead being sent to individual email addresses on your team, and that can pose some challenges that I'm sure we're going to talk about today. Maybe you've got a 10-person customer service team, and customers have a customer service rep that they work with, and they send their orders directly to those individuals. And so it's not ending up in a centralized queue. It's going to someone's personal work email address, and some challenges there can occur, certainly when that individual is out of the office on vacation or for other reasons, and it really limits process visibility at a management level. With all of these document types coming in multiple ways, there's also a high risk for duplicates. See that a lot on the accounts payable side, right? A supplier emails you an invoice, they mail you a copy as well. Maybe they email you a couple copies to different people within the company. So high risk of duplicates, spending time processing duplicate invoices, paying duplicate invoices, and so forth. And there are different types of documents, right? From an invoice perspective, you've got invoices that are based on a purchase order, some that aren't. You've got inventory invoices, invoices for your utilities, MRO. You've got credit memos. On the order side, you get orders from your customers for equipment. You might have blanket POs. There could be parts orders. There could be orders you receive for services, work orders, that sort of thing. So it's not just an invoice and an order. There's probably different categories of those documents that follow different rules and have different processes that have to follow within your various departments. And the quality of these documents can vary, right? So you can have inbound clean PDFs that get emailed to you, or you could have documents that are poor quality from a scan, or maybe they emailed you a scan of a scan of a scan. So the degradation that happens each time that takes place. Some of these documents get printed off, and then there's handwritten notes or stamps on those documents. And sometimes those handwritten notes and stamps cover up important data that you need to glean information-wise from them. And then there's supporting documentation, right? So it's not just the invoice, it's not just the customer's purchase order that comes in, but you've got documentation related to those transactions from multiple sources. So from an AP side, in the purchase to pay process, you've got your outbound purchase orders you send to the supplier, the incoming packing list and receiving information. You've got emails going back and forth with the supplier, and you've got the method that they pay you, whether that's a check or an ACH transaction. And on the customer service side, you've got the orders, of course, but before that, there might be quotes. You might have email back and forth with the customer. You've got your shipping documents, your pick tickets, your bills of lading. You've got the invoice you sent to the customer, and also the payment. So a lot of different document types to manage, and a lot of times those go into a packet of information that gets filed away. And so, but just making a point here that this documentation arrives from different departments, different locations, different sources. So those are some document related challenges for accounts payable and processing sales orders. But now if you think about the business process itself, if you don't have technology in place to manage it, then it's probably highly manual, right? So what do we mean by that? Well, first and foremost, everyone just thinks about the data entry function, right? You have these documents and you have a team of people in these departments that spend probably hours a day per person manually entering the information that's on those invoices or on those orders into your ERP system to create the voucher or to create the sales order. And that task, or that data entry task, takes those individuals away from probably more value-added responsibilities that you want to give to them. The customer service side is a big one, and that's not to diminish value-added tasks on the accounting side, but if customer service is responsible for manually entering orders, that's time they're not spending providing service to your customer. And I guess entering the order is service, but, proactively reaching out, handling their inquiries and so forth. So it's taking away from other more value-added tasks that can be done. And because it's a data entry process, it's prone to error, right? Data entry errors can lead to overpayment, short payments, shipping the product to the wrong location. I'm sure you're very familiar with what data entry errors can mean to you within these respective processes. And it's also a highly manual, they're both highly manual when it comes to routing these documents through your organization, whether it could be invoices that need to be reviewed or approved. Maybe there's some exception handling. Maybe an order comes in, it doesn't have the right pricing on it, so you've got an escalation that needs to take place. So document routing, whether it's a paper shuffle or maybe you're internally just using email, that lacks control, right? Lacks control, lacks visibility. It's still a time-consuming process. It's difficult to manage. These documents can get quote unquote lost in the process. When we think about accounts payable invoices, a lost invoice can mean you miss an early pay discount opportunity, or you end up having to pay that invoice late. And whether or not you tell me that you pay late fees, certainly supplier relationships are important, right? So I don't think paying your suppliers late too often is going to result in a good relationship and them wanting to do business with you, regardless if there are late fees. The orders that get lost could delay the fulfillment of that order. Maybe you've got service level agreements with your customers where you have to turn these orders around within a certain period of time. So a lost order or a misplaced order could certainly delay that and cause you to miss those SLAs. And as I've mentioned a few times already, a process that's manual, whether there's a paper shuffle, email, et cetera, not a controlled formal solution that lacks visibility. It's very difficult to report on stacks of paper. It's very difficult to report on orders that are sitting in an email inbox. So we talked about duplicates already, but how do you know what invoices are out there waiting for approval? What invoices have come in, but the goods haven't been received yet, so you can't process those? Or maybe the various reasons why an order can't be processed because there's some exception, right? The PO comes in, it's missing certain data, the data's not correct, the customer's not set up in your system yet. So what are those exception reasons? Invoices that are open, lost orders, these are all things that our customers, when we speak with them, are looking for reporting and analytics and complete visibility on to help them drive their process towards more automation, to make better business decisions and so forth. And just overall process performance, right? How is your team performing? It's not just implementing workflow or implementing technology on day one and living with it. It's continuous improvement. So you define a workflow process, you use it, and then from there, you're able to make continued improvements to that workflow, either as your business grows, your process changes, or you find that there's a more efficient way to do something. And the third category of challenges I want to talk about are just from your business in general, right? Your organization, there are other considerations that are going on within your four walls that cause challenges and probably bring the benefit of automation to the table for you. I would ask you, are you in growth mode as an organization, either organically or through acquisition? Because if your organization is growing, then your volume of these transactional documents, these invoices or these customer orders, they are growing, right? And the more volume you have, the more need for automation. So needing something that's scalable, handling those volumes as they increase. And if you're growing, do your processes become more complex? And then that drives the need for automation and for workflow. This could be, by the way, a critical factor to your business case. So when I speak with organizations and we have a conversation around, what are your volumes today? And they want to put a business case together, I really encourage you to think about a 5-year plan, right? And each year, are you accounting for growth? Is there something there that you can put into your business case over 5 years to really make it compelling? What's your business continuity plan? If the last year and a half or so has taught us anything, it's, working remotely is the way of the world. It's what we have to get used to. And so how are you able to process these documents if employees are working remotely? But then you just think about your overall disaster recovery plan. And if you're needing to maintain customer orders for a period of time, whether it's 7 years or through a warranty period or indefinitely, and there's some physical disaster that renders those documents no longer there, are you really adhering to those policies for document retention? So just disaster recovery, this can play a big role. Are you good to do business with, right? Mentioned earlier, late payments to your suppliers. So supplier relations, acquiring new customers or retaining the customers you have. One of the case studies I'm going to talk about in a few minutes deals directly with that. And, internally, how are you doing in terms of attracting and retaining the talent on your team. I was just on a call yesterday with an organization that has said it's very difficult. It's very difficult to retain talent, and they're in the recreational space and out at their individual locations, 600 plus. There's a lot of turnover there, right? And so they're looking for ways to implement technology to make it easy, so they don't have to spend a lot of time retraining new hires. But just the core team that you have, processing payables or in customer service, are they having to work overtime? Their quality of life issues there because the volume is too much for them to handle in their normal work day. Are they wanting to work on more challenging tasks, right? Sitting down and doing data entry for 4 hours a day, that might not be what they want to do. They might want to work on something more valuable, more challenging, and this gives them the opportunity in terms of freeing them up for that. And then I would say just, keep in mind as we focus on AP and we focus on customer service or sales orders today, that there's probably a lot of other areas outside of the back office within your organization that could use automation, where you can take this technology and expand it into, whether it's documentation moving around on the shop floor, or you need to store and retain quality documents or standard operating procedure documentation. I encourage you to really think about any process you have that's document centric. That's what you want to examine to see if removing the paper in favor of electronic document storage and workflow automation can be a benefit. But again, the focus of the session today in this 3-part series is more accounts payable and sales orders, but you can take what we talk about and try and apply it to other areas within your organization as well. So let's start to look a little bit more specifically at accounts payable, and then we'll get into sales orders. So let's start with the conversation around why would you even want to automate accounts payable? I talked about some challenges, but I didn't really equate any dollars and cents or time to those challenges. So let's try and do that, and let's use some industry benchmarks and statistics that are out there already, the studies and statistics that you can just Google and find, and you can really use them to start your business case. Aberdeen Group here will look at some numbers, and a lot of these organizations, they'll research companies and they'll say that there are those with full automation. Oftentimes those are called best-in-class organizations, right? And companies without automation, very little, no automation, categorized as the laggards, right? So if we take a look at those two distinct ends of the spectrum and we look at the number of days for us to process an invoice, we're looking at 16 days without automation to 3 days with a company that's fully automated, best in class. So that's a number for you to analyze and report on what you're doing currently, because this goes directly to any early pay discounts. And I've seen early pay discounts gained with a fully automated solution be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. Now, each individual attendee on this call today, you might say we don't have that much, but it could be tens of thousands or thousands. It all goes to your business case. So being able to spin these invoices around and get them paid sooner, if you do want to take advantage of early pay discounts, cycle time is a big measurement. Avoiding late fees, of course, as well, is the other end of that conversation. And just overall, what does it cost you to process an invoice? So labor is a big part of the dollar measurement here in this study, but it's not the only thing. It does factor in other benefits, such as the elimination of duplicate invoices. We'll use that as one example, right? So, excuse me, over $16 an invoice versus $3.34. What's your annual invoice volume? Multiply them by those numbers, and yeah, you'll have to do probably some more analysis internally to maybe believe what that number adds up to be. But this is what Aberdeen has done the analysis on, and again, quite compelling. And coming back to that cycle time and that early pay discount, so a different way to look at it, even a best-in-class organization, fully automated, they're not going to take advantage of every discount available to them. It's just not going to happen, because if there's invoice exception handling or resolution that's going to take place, you might not be in total control of that, right? The supplier might also play a role in resolving that. So you might not get those early pay discounts at 100%, but 90% of the total available to you versus only 20% without automation. So try and unpeel that onion internally, find out what it is that you're missing. If you are, can you maximize out your early pay discounts at 90%? And what would that mean to you? From a benefit standpoint, we've talked about some of these. maybe not so much others. The concept of straight through processing is really what people are after. It's touchless invoice processing. The invoice comes in, it hits that email box that you have in the department, or you drop it in the scanner. But from that point forward, no one touches it. The data goes right to your ERP system, and it's vouchered. So that's really for your purchase order-based invoices. Your non-PO invoices, they still have to be routed for coding and approval, but you're after straight through processing. So that's going to be the touchless. That's where you're going to free up a ton of time. That's how you're going to get into maxing out those early pays, eliminating the late fees. Of course, by getting this data straight through from the document, validated into the ERP system without data entry, you're going to eliminate those errors. You're going to take all the costs out of processing these invoices, take those out of the mix, and really have that overall 360-degree view of how the process is performing. If we want to think about how AP automation works, high level, we kind of walk through the process a little bit. Those invoices that come into you via email, they come into hopefully a departmental email box for accounts payable, and the IntelliChief system will monitor that email box and automatically import those invoices into the workflow process without anyone having to touch them. Any of those invoices that come in the mail, pieces of paper, those are going to get dropped in the scanner by someone, but the scanner creates the image, and then that image will get imported directly into IntelliChief workflow and continue on in the process there. So that's the entry point for these invoice documents. And usually the next step in the process is to have those invoices go through a data capture or an OCR process, OCR, optical character recognition, if you're not familiar. We can talk about extracting metadata. We can talk about indexing. The reality is all the information on these invoices at the header level, the footer level, all the line item detail, it gets extracted off the invoice. And beyond extraction, it gets verified for accuracy and it gets validated for accuracy. And the validations happen in real time, or they should happen in real time, not only against whatever business rules you have, but also by doing lookups in real time to your ERP system to determine that the supplier is valid, that the purchase order is valid, that the invoice isn't a duplicate, have the goods been received, do the payment terms on the invoice match the payment terms you have on file in your ERP system. So there's a lot of lookups and a lot of validations that happen against your system of record, your ERP system, to ensure that this data is accurately, not just accurately being extracted from the invoice, but is able to be processed downstream in workflow. Because what happens from there is that invoice in that data move through workflow, and depending on the type of invoice it is, it's going to follow different paths within the workflow in IntelliChief. So if it's based on a purchase order, it might go through a two-way match or a three-way match process. We've implemented a lot of customers doing a four-way match as well against something like a quality receiver. So depending on what your process is, if the invoice doesn't match, maybe it's routed to purchasing for some exception handling, or to someone in the warehouse, or to another individual. Any invoice that's flagged as not being based on a purchase order, it's probably going to get routed for approval or multiple approvals based on your approval matrix. It's going to be routed for GL coding. There's a lot of validations that take place in workflow all throughout. And once those invoices have been fully matched, approved, coded, and so forth, the data gets extracted, or exported, I should say, from the workflow, and that data ends up in your ERP system to voucher that invoice. So that's a high-level flow of accounts payable. In part 2 of this webinar series, we're going to get into a lot more detail on the AP automation side. From a sales order perspective, again, why would you want to implement automation within your order entry or your customer service function? And it just starts with the cost to process a single order. And where do you want to be, right? You want to be best in class. You want to free up time. You want to cut costs. You want to have a better customer experience, customer service experience with your customers. So labor factors into these measurements. If you look at $50.70 to process a single invoice, it's not just the labor, though. It's the lost orders. It's the missed SLAs. It's the time spent getting issues resolved around those orders if there are issues. So all that adds up to a cost. And again, some benchmarks to take a look at. The benefits, some are similar and some are unique to the accounts payable side. Again, if this is a very data entry driven process, then the solution should be eliminating, 90% plus of that data entry, eliminating the data entry errors, doing all the validations, routing the exceptions as needed, eliminating the duplicate orders, providing all that process visibility so the orders don't end up lost or delayed, which could impact your business. Speaking of business continuity and disaster recovery, in a case study in a second, got another customer where that plays or did play a very big role. So we'll touch on that in a minute. The process for automating sales orders is pretty similar. I think that with the one difference here is you're not receiving on the front end purchase orders in via the mail, would be my guess. So we're talking about automating the inbound email volume, understanding that EDI and customer portals might play a role in how you get orders in. Maybe you get phone orders and, customer places the order over the phone and someone just manually keys that into the order entry system. But for these inbound purchase orders, hitting a general mailbox, being brought in to have all of the data extracted, validated, verified for accuracy, just like we did on the payable side, doing lookups in real time against your ERP system to conduct those validations. So is this a duplicate order? Is the item number correct? Is it in stock? Do we have the correct pricing? Is the customer even set up yet? Maybe the customer's on credit hold, so an exception might take that order in workflow and route it to the credit department to resolve. Depending on the type of business you're in, it might not be as simple as order comes in and put the data in the ERP system to create the sales order. Maybe that order has to be reviewed or approved. Maybe it's got to go through engineering, quality control, some other departments before it can be entered. So you might have a lengthy approval process in your organization where others do not, and that could play a role downstream within the workflow. So whether it's an exception handling or an approval process or a review or just some final validations at an automatic stage in workflow, when all that data has been validated within IntelliChief, it gets exported to create the sales order within your ERP system. So very, very similar process. I would say that, at least in this talk track, right? But there are many of you on the call today, and while it's probably true that all of you have a similar accounts payable process, understanding there could be some uniqueness, certainly, on the sales order side, you might all have a completely different process for how customer orders move through your department or departments in order to get processed. So the real world flow can look a lot different than something as such streamlined as this. If we take a look at some case studies as we start to bring this presentation in for a landing, I want to give you a few different examples. So the first one is an organization, manufacturing customer of ours, that only implemented IntelliChief, and I just say only, but it's an AP automation success story or conversation here. So their initial project for IntelliChief was accounts payable automation, a little bit about them so you can get a feel. They've got a accounts payable team of 4 people, and they had 70,000 invoices a year, multi-page. That team was entering in by hand into their ERP system. They were very heavy on the purchase order based invoices, 95%. So straight through processing was a huge goal of theirs. They had 30 people in the company that might need to touch an invoice that was not based on a purchase order, for the purpose of approving it. Very time-consuming process. There was a lot of redundant data entry they were doing, and they had a legacy document management system, 2 of them actually. So not only were they entering data from these invoices into their ERP system, for them, they were actually running JD Edwards, but they were also manually indexing those documents in Documentum. And they went into this project for AP automation knowing that their next phase, what they wanted to do after go live, was to expand into the customer service function to automate sales orders. And with IntelliChief, what they realized was over 90% of their invoices went straight through without being touched by an individual at all, automatically into JD Edwards. So very powerful success story. In addition to AP automation, part of that project was also services invoices. And so that was a little bit of a different document type for them within AP. They would get maybe 1,000 of these service invoices a month, which were for repairs for their equipment that would take place out in the field. And they were being manually entered into JD Edwards by a couple of individuals. which would basically create work order lines within the system, and that would end up resulting in a voucher. And so what they used IntelliChief for was to identify that, hey, these invoices are services invoices, still extract the data, still validate it for accuracy, and then it would pass that data to automatically create those work order lines within the system. And then as part of this, they replaced their legacy document repository and leveraged IntelliChief for that purpose. So really great success story there in that example around AP automation. Another one is an organization that did both automation of sales orders and accounts payable, did them in phases, of course. The initial project was sales order automation, where there were upwards of 24 people in a team that they referred to as their central order team, and they were responsible for doing order entry. They had about 70% of their total total order volume coming in via email. They had EDI, and they had an online portal where customers were able to log orders, but 70% of their total volume was still being manually entered by those individuals, and it would take upwards of 8 minutes to process a single order. They had a lot of challenges around data accuracy, as well as a lot of those folks have been with the company for a long time. And so there was a heavy reliance on tribal knowledge there. Good example that they like to talk about is, when order comes in from a certain account, it always comes in from Mary, those orders are shipped to a certain location. But when an order comes in from Bob, even though it has the same ship location on the purchase order, it doesn't go to that location, it goes somewhere else. And they just know that because they've been dealing with that customer for so long. And that's not a defined, repeatable process, right? So they also had business continuity concerns due to a few years ago when, and I forget the name of the hurricane, but when it came into the Gulf and really impacted Houston, and they had some of their central order team processors in that area, and so those orders couldn't get processed. So there were certain business continuity concerns that were part of the business case here. So with IntelliChief, they were able to take the time it took to process those orders down to under a minute, and that's if they even needed to be touched, right? Because a lot of those would go straight through, but they found that the ones that might still need to be touched, it would take well under a minute to make any correction or edit that would be needed. And then they were able to get those defined, controlled processes, those repeatable steps. The business continuity is a natural extension of the automation. They can shift the workload via the workflow to anywhere in the country, anywhere remotely where someone can process it and review information. And they had that centralized repository for all the documents related to a customer transaction. From there, they dovetailed into the accounts payable process, and you can see some of their volume there. Very heavy inbound via email. Another good example of very heavy on the PO-based side. And, the common themes of efficiency and gaining process visibility. A lot of times accounts payable groups are managing reports on Excel spreadsheets to track invoices that are out for approval and what's going to be accrued for and a whole host of other reports and information. So they were able to automatically generate these reports to the data that lived in the IntelliChief system and continue to, as the organization grows, not have to add headcount to handle that additional volume. And then the third one I want to show you, this customer here, so this is on the customer order side of things, and these guys are a foundry. And their initial project was to process orders. They had a very complex order process. It wasn't just customer service that was involved. There were multiple departments involved in getting an order from beginning to end, and that process also lacked a lot of visibility as it was very paper-driven. If we take a look at what their workflow process looked like, an order came in to customer service, to their particular CSR customer service rep, who would review the order, and depending on what that order was, if the customer was new or not, whether or not, credit checks needed to happen, or if the pricing was accurate, there were different routes that this order could take, not just from within customer service, but over to estimating, and as you can see downstream, to engineering, to review costs and pricing and review specs, quality control, production control, then back to customer service to enter the order into the ERP system. And every step along the way, more supporting documentation was getting added to the mix. right? So a lot of paperwork, a lot of documentation that had to be handled, had to be reviewed, had to be approved, filed at the end of the process as well. And so with these guys being a made-to-order shop, and what they were able to do is, they had a long time it would take to fulfill an order, 9.5 days, upwards of 9.5 days. There were other manual steps being taken along the way as well. And with IntelliChief, they were able to cut that lead time in half, right? So huge for them, competitive advantage. Going to their customers, going after new customers and saying, hey, we can deliver to you an order in 4 days, right? Where the other competitors in their space would take, the same amount of time it would take them previously, 9.5, 10 days. Fewer lost orders, increased visibility. The customers were certainly much more satisfied. So huge success story there, and maybe a little bit of a different look on sales order processing due to that workflow and due to the different departments that needed to touch those particular order documents. So as we bring it to conclusion here, and I'll field your questions in a minute, couple of steps that you can take. First of all, we're going to now, in a couple of weeks, November 17th, transition into a webinar that is specifically for accounts payable automation. So that one is going to feature a lot more detail and a lot more specific content around how you would want to automate your accounts payable process. And then after that, I believe in early December, we'll do our third and final in this series for manufacturers, which will focus on customer orders. So next one up is for accounts payable, and we'll make sure we get you all the webinar invites for that. But we'd love to talk to you. If there's anything that sounded like you could relate to it on today's conversation, you've got any challenges that you think you'd want to discuss, any pain points, any gaps in your process, maybe you're here because you actually have an active project, we'd love to talk with you and see if there's any synergy between what we bring to the table and what you're looking to accomplish. So with that being said, this session again was recorded or is being recorded, so we can get you the link to that recording. Otherwise, I'd be happy to field any questions you've got. If you want to fill them out in the go-to webinar panel, I'll give you a couple minutes to do that, and then I'll answer any questions that you submit. Right now, there are only 2 questions in there, so I will answer those, and then if no more get added, we'll bring it to conclusion. The first question is specifically asking, does IntelliChief integrate with JD Edwards Enterprise One, and does the version of Enterprise One matter? So, excuse me, the answer is yes. IntelliChief has a very formal integration for JD Edwards Enterprise One. The version does not matter. The integration exists for both accounts payable automation and sales order automation. I will say that for the rest of the folks on the call that, either don't run JD Edwards Enterprise One or don't run, maybe you run JD Edwards World. We have an integration for JD Edwards World as well, but, some other ERPs that we've got formal integrations with would include Oracle, eBusiness Suite. There are various Infor ERP applications that we have formal integration for. There are some very niche integrations, especially on the Foundry side. I mentioned that one customer runs Odyssey from B&L. We've got integration there. So integration, ERP integration is very important to the IntelliChief solution. And so if we do engage, we'd love to find out what ERP you run and talk to you about how IntelliChief would integrate with that. The other question is just asking how long a project like this would take. You didn't specify whether it was accounts payable or sales order automation, but probably the answer is the same. And the first answer is it depends. Really depends on the complexity. We've got some package implementations that can really shorten the project timeline. And we've seen some very complex projects that, of course, directly relate to the length. I would say on average, to automate accounts payable or to automate your sales order entry process, if you went into the initial discussion with an expectation of a 4 to 6 month project, if you're focused on it, is probably a good expectation until we get into the weeds and really understand the complexity of what your requirements are. Doing a quick check here. It does not look like, one other question did come in. Do you have a footprint in Europe? We do have customers in Europe. IntelliChief, the IntelliChief team is all located in the U.S. We have 2 physical offices as well as remote employees throughout the country, but we have customers in Europe. Our tech support is available 24/7, 365. So the time zone difference would not impact any ability for us to support you. You know, this solution becomes mission critical in nature, probably more so on the sales order side, but accounts payable as well. And 24/7, 365 support is really the only way to support a mission critical application. So we've got the structure in place to support you. And yes, we've got customers in Europe. Let me just do a quick double check. I do not see any other questions in there. So with that being said, we'll bring today's session to conclusion. Thanks for the time today. My contact information is on the screen. So if you want to have any questions one-off for me, you can feel free to drop me a call or shoot me an email. Happy to interact with you or get in touch with the right person here at IntelliChief who can answer your question. Otherwise, hope to see you on November 17th in our AP Automation webinar. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your week.